He was standing at the far end of the room when my mother looked at me across the dinner table, smiled the way she only smiled when she was about to say something that would leave a mark, and said, loudly, clearly, with the particular precision of someone who has been saving a sentence for exactly this moment, "Maya, sweetheart, we are all just very glad your sister turned out differently." There were 14 people at that table. I counted them afterward, the way you count things when the rest of your brain has gone somewhere quiet and unreachable. 14 people who heard her. 14 people who either laughed softly, looked at their plates, or, in the case of the man at the far end of the room, the one none of us had quite figured out yet, the one my sister's fiancé had introduced only as my business partner, Caleb, turned his head and looked at me with an expression I could not name at the time and have spent every day since trying to find the right word for. I did not cry. I want you to know that first. I am telling you this story from the other side of it, and I need you to understand that the woman sitting at that table in her clearance rack dress with her mother's words settling into her like stones dropping into still water, that woman did not cry. She picked up her fork. She cut a piece of the rosemary chicken her mother had specifically mentioned cost $40 per pound. She chewed it. She swallowed it. And she smiled the particular smile she had been practicing since the age of 9, the one that said, "This is fine. I am fine. Everything here is absolutely fine. Nothing was fine. But stay with me. Because this is the story of how I learned that the worst moments of your life are not always the ending. Sometimes they are the exact room where the rest of your life begins. If this is your first time here, welcome. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell, because we tell these stories every week, stories of real women, real pain, and real reversals that will make you rethink everything you believe about where you are right now. And drop your name and your city in the comments. I want to know who is in this room with me tonight. My name is Maya. I am 32 years old. I grew up in a house in Charlotte, North Carolina, that had nice things in every room and a particular kind of coldness in every hallway. The kind that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the way approval was distributed in that family. My parents were not cruel people in the way that word is usually used. They did not shout. They did not slam doors. What they did was compare. Constantly, quietly, with the smooth efficiency of people who had decided very early which of their 2 daughters was the investment and which was the cost. My sister Priya was the investment. Priya was 2 years younger than me and had been, from approximately the age of 7, everything our parents had blueprinted in their minds when they imagined what a daughter should be. She was graceful in the way that some people simply are born, the kind of ease that makes a room rearrange itself around you without your asking. She got straight A's, then got into Duke, then got a job at a consulting firm, then started dating a man named Rohan who came from money and wore it like a second skin. By 30, she was engaged. By the time the engagement dinner happened, she was everything our parents had ever wanted to point to and say, "Look what we made." I was the other story. I had spent my 20s making choices that my parents interpreted as a personal insult. After a business degree, I could not make myself use for the job it was designed for. I had spent 4 years trying to build a handmade jewelry business from a small studio apartment in Raleigh. Not a hobby, a real business, with an Etsy shop, and then a website, and then a small wholesale account with a boutique in Chapel Hill that kept reordering. I was not wealthy. I was not stable in the way my parents recognized stability. I drove a 2014 Honda with a cracked side mirror, wore mostly thrift store finds, styled in ways that magazines would later call effortless, but that my mother called not trying. And I had not been in a serious relationship in 2 years because the last one had ended when the man I dated told me I was too in my own head, and my mother had agreed with him at Easter dinner. When Priya announced her engagement, my mother called me the same day. The call lasted 45 minutes. 30 of those minutes were about Priya. The remaining 15 were about what I was going to wear to the engagement dinner, so I didn't embarrass anyone. I should have known then what the evening was going to be. The dinner was held at my parents' house on a Friday evening in April. My mother had arranged everything with the particular theatrical precision she reserved for events she intended to be remembered. The dining room table had been extended with a leaf I had never seen before. There were flowers from a florist, not a grocery store. The rosemary chicken that cost $40 a pound was accompanied by 3 side dishes from a caterer and a wine that my father introduced to the table by its year and vineyard in a voice that meant, "Notice this." Rohan's family was there, his parents, his aunt, his younger brother. They were warm, polite, and sufficiently impressed by the florals. Rohan himself was handsome in the unchallenging way of men who have never needed to be interesting because they have always been successful. He was kind to Priya, which mattered. He was generic to everyone else, which didn't. And then there was Caleb Moore. I would learn his full name later, much later, after everything else had already happened. At the engagement dinner, he was simply the quiet man at the far end of the table, early 40s, dark hair with the first threads of silver at the temples, a suit that had not come from any mall I had ever been in, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who are never in a hurry because the world has learned to wait for them. He had arrived with Rohan's family, introduced briefly and without fanfare. Business partner, close friend, came down from New York for the weekend. I noticed him the way you notice something you cannot immediately categorize. He was not performing for the table the way the others were. He was listening. Actually listening, not the polite nodding of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but the focused, quiet attention of someone genuinely collecting information. He asked questions of the people around him and then sat with the answers. He smiled at the right moments and not at the wrong ones. He drank his wine slowly. And when my mother made her remark, "We are all just very glad your sister turned out differently," he was the only person at that table whose expression was not laughter, not discomfort, not careful neutrality. He looked at me, directly, the way you look at someone when you want them to know you see them. I looked away. I picked up my fork. I cut my $40 chicken. I need to go back for a moment and give you the full picture of what that sentence was built from, because 14 words do not exist in a vacuum. They are always the condensed form of something much longer. My mother's remark was the headline of a story she had been writing about me for 20 years. When I was 12, I won a regional art competition for a jewelry piece I made from copper wire and beach glass I had collected myself. My mother's response when I came home with the ribbon was, "That's sweet. Priya got 100 on her math test today." When I was 19 and declared I wanted to study design instead of business, she sat me down and said she was not going to pay for a degree in pretending. I switched to business. When I was 25 and started the jewelry company, she asked, at least twice a year, when I was going to get a real job. When I was 28 and the business had its best quarter yet, $11,000 in a single month, I called her to share the news. She said, "That's nice, but Priya just got promoted." I had spent 20 years being the before picture in a story my mother was telling about her after. And I had spent 20 years smiling at dinner tables and cutting my chicken and pretending that the stones she dropped into me were not building, accumulating, settling into a weight that I carried every single day. I am telling you this because I want you to understand what that room held. 14 people and 20 years of quiet accumulation, and a woman in a clearance rack dress trying to be invisible at a table where she was simultaneously the only person everyone was looking at, because cruelty always creates its own spectacle. Please subscribe to this channel if you have not already. Hit that bell. And drop your name and your city in the comments below, because this community is made of real people sitting in real rooms recognizing real things in these stories, and I want to know who you are. Who is watching this tonight? The dinner ended. Dessert was a cake with Priya and Rohan's names written in gold script, and everyone photographed it before eating it. I photographed it too because it was easier than explaining why I didn't want to. My mother gave a toast that mentioned Priya's career, Priya's kindness, Priya's excellent choice of partner, and then glanced at me at the very end and said, "And we are so glad Maya could be here." Like I was a neighbor. Like I was a pleasant addition to the guest list rather than her firstborn daughter. I helped clear the plates. That was something I had always done, made myself useful in the kitchen during family gatherings, because the kitchen was the one room in my parents' house where no one was watching, where I could just be a pair of hands doing a task without anyone measuring whether I was doing it correctly or successfully, or in a way that reflected well on the family. I was standing at the sink, my back to the kitchen door, running hot water over a serving dish, when I heard footsteps on the tile behind me. I assumed it was my mother. I braced. A man's voice said, "The piece you're wearing, where did you get it?" I turned around. It was Caleb, standing in my parents' kitchen in his expensive suit, holding an empty wine glass, looking at the necklace around my throat, a copper and green tourmaline piece I had made myself, one of my favorites, the kind of thing I wore when I needed to feel like myself. I said, "I made it." He said, "You made it." Not a question, a recalibration. The way someone says something when their mental model of a situation has just shifted and they need a moment to let the new information settle. He said, "Can I look at it?" I said yes, mostly because I did not know what else to say. He stepped closer, not uncomfortably close, but close enough to actually look. And he did actually look, with the same focused attention he had been applying to the dinner table conversation all evening, the same quality of being genuinely present with a thing. He said, "The oxidation on the copper, did you control that or let it happen naturally?" I stared at him. No one had ever asked me that. Not a family member, not a customer, not the boutique buyer who had been ordering from me for 2 years. No one had ever looked at my work closely enough to notice that there was a choice involved in how the metal aged. I said, "I control it. Liver of sulfur, applied in stages, then sealed. The green on the tourmaline pulls the patina warmer." He nodded slowly. He said, "How long have you been doing this?" I said, "Seriously, about 6 years. Casually since I was 12. He said, "Do you have a website?" I told him the name. He took out his phone and typed it in right there, standing in my parents' kitchen while the party continued in the next room. He scrolled for about 30 seconds. Then he looked up at me. He said, "These should not be on Etsy." I said, "That's a surprisingly direct thing to say to someone you met 45 minutes ago." He said, "I'm told I don't waste time." A pause. "My name is Caleb Moore. I own a retail group, among other things. We have 11 boutique locations in 6 cities. We carry independent jewelry designers. I've been looking for someone who works in mixed metals the way you do for about 8 months. The sink was still running. I reached over and turned it off. I said, "You're serious." He said, "I'm always serious. That's also something I've been told." What happened next did not happen the way these things happen in movies. There was no dramatic announcement at the dinner table. There was no moment where I marched back into the room and told everyone what had just occurred. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that real reversals, the ones that actually change your life, are almost never theatrical. They are almost always quiet. They happen in kitchens while the party goes on in the next room. They happen in the spaces everyone else forgot to watch. Caleb and I talked in that kitchen for 22 minutes. I know because I checked my phone afterward, somehow certain it had been longer. He asked about my process, my materials, my pricing structure, my production capacity. He asked if I worked alone. He asked if I had considered wholesale beyond the Chapel Hill boutique. He spoke about his retail group, 11 stores, he had said, but I later learned that was the modest version. The full picture was closer to 30 locations across the country, plus an online platform with serious traffic, and a reputation for launching independent designers into national recognition. He asked for my card. I gave him one of the small craft paper cards I had printed at home on my inkjet printer with my logo and my email address. He looked at it for a moment, and I waited for something, some flicker of the expression I was used to, the barely there condescension that people with resources and options often showed when confronted with the home-printed business card of someone who was very clearly still figuring it out. It did not come. He put the card in his inside jacket pocket. He said, "I'll be in touch by Wednesday." He refilled his wine glass from the bottle on the counter. He said, "The chicken was good, by the way." And he walked back out to the party. I stood at the sink for another full minute. Then I finished the dishes. My mother found me in the kitchen 15 minutes later. She came in to refill the bread basket, or that was the reason she gave, and she saw me standing there finishing the drying and she said, with the same smooth ease she always used when she was doing the most damage. You know, Rohan's family is very accomplished. I hope you're being careful not to talk too much about your little jewelry project. It can come across as, not serious. I said, "Okay, Mom." She said, "Priya mentioned you were talking to Rohan's business partner. He's very successful, Maya, very. I just don't want you to embarrass yourself by, well, I said, "I know, Mom." She nodded, satisfied that the message had been delivered, picked up her bread basket, and went back to her party. I put down the dish towel. I pressed my hands flat on the cool edge of the sink. I looked at the window above it, dark outside, my own reflection looking back at me. I thought about the card in Caleb Moore's jacket pocket. I thought about the way he had asked about the oxidation on the copper. I thought about 20 years of being the before picture in someone else's story. And I made a decision that I did not announce to anyone, did not tell my mother or my sister or the 14 people at that table. I made it alone, at the kitchen sink, in the quiet after the party noise. I decided I was done being small. Caleb Moore emailed on Tuesday, not Wednesday, Tuesday. The email was 3 paragraphs, professional and direct, outlining what a wholesale partnership with his retail group would look like and what kind of initial order he was considering. The number he mentioned as a starting order was larger than my best full year of Etsy sales. I read the email 3 times. Then I called Renee, my best friend since college, the one person who had believed in the jewelry business from the first piece. And I read it to her out loud, and she screamed, and I held the phone away from my ear, and then I screamed too, alone in my studio apartment in Raleigh with copper shavings on the workbench and the cracked mirror Honda in the parking lot outside. I wrote back the same afternoon. Professional. Measured. I did not use an exclamation point, which cost me something. We scheduled a call for Thursday. The call lasted an hour and a half. Caleb asked every question a serious buyer asks: lead time, consistency of materials, capacity for scaling, interest in developing an exclusive line for his platform. He introduced me by phone to his head buyer, a woman named Sasha who had been in the independent jewelry industry for 15 years and who asked questions so precise and knowledgeable that I felt, for the first time in my professional life, like I was talking to someone who understood exactly what I was making and why it was worth something. By the end of the call, there was a preliminary agreement in principle. Sasha would send a formal letter of intent by the following week. They wanted an exclusive capsule collection, 12 pieces, to launch in 4 of their flagship locations and on the online platform simultaneously. The timeline was 4 months. The terms were fair, better than fair. I hung up the phone and sat very still for a moment in my studio. I looked at the copper wire on the workbench, the liver of sulfur in its small amber jar, the tourmalines and the moonstones in their labeled compartments, the tools I had bought second-hand, and the ones I had saved up for, and the one good pair of pliers my mother had given me as a stocking stuffer at Christmas the year I was 12, the year I won the ribbon for the copper and beach glass piece, probably not understanding what she was giving me. I thought about 20 years of comparison and clearance racks and $40 chicken, and we are all just very glad your sister turned out differently. And I thought, okay, here we go. The letter of intent arrived. I signed it. A lawyer friend reviewed it. Yes, I had a lawyer friend, the kind of practical thing you accumulate in your 30s when you start taking yourself seriously, and said the terms were genuinely good. I began the capsule collection the following Monday. 4 months of the most focused, disciplined, alive work I have ever done. I worked in my studio every day, sometimes until midnight, not because anyone was pushing me, but because I was finally working towards something that felt proportional to the effort. The 12 pieces took shape, each one building on the language I had been developing for 6 years. The copper and mixed metal and controlled oxidation, and stones chosen for the way they interacted with aged metal rather than competing with it. Sasha visited my studio in month 2 and spent 2 hours going through the work in progress, asking questions, suggesting nothing, which I learned was her way of saying she approved. The collection launched on a Thursday in September. Caleb's platform sent an email to their subscriber list, 400,000 people. The 4 flagship stores installed the display cases I had spent a week helping to design. The pieces went live online at 9 in the morning Eastern Time. By 11, half the collection had sold. By end of day, it was gone. Sasha called me that evening and said in her precise, measured way, "This is not a typical result. You should know that." I said, "I know." She said, "We'd like to discuss a second collection, a larger one, and we'd like to discuss the possibility of a permanent line." I said, "I'd like that too." I want to slow down here and tell you something, because this is not a story about money or success in the way those words are usually used. The sold-out collection was real. The permanent line that followed was real. The moment, 8 months later, when Caleb Moore's retail group and I signed a full partnership agreement that changed my financial life in ways I still sometimes have to remind myself are real, all of that was real. But none of it is the most important part of this story. The most important part happened on a Sunday afternoon in November, 2 months after the launch. My mother called. She had seen something. A friend of hers had forwarded an article from a regional lifestyle magazine that had done a small feature on the collection and mentioned my name. My mother's voice on the phone was different, not dramatically different, subtly different in the way that a temperature change is subtle. You feel it before you can name it. She said, "I saw that article about your jewelry." And I said, "Yes." She said, "It sounds like things are going well." I said, "They are." A pause. Then she said, "Caleb Moore from the engagement dinner. I didn't realize he was, your father looked him up. His company is very." She stopped, started again. "We're proud of you, Maya." 14 words, the same number as the sentence at the dinner table. "We're proud of you, Maya. 4 months after, we are all just very glad your sister turned out differently." I want to tell you that those 4 words, proud of you, healed something. I want to tell you that I felt the weight lift, that the 20 years of stones dropped into still water finally floated back to the surface and dissolved. I want to tell you that my mother's words, this time, landed soft. They did not. Not entirely. Not immediately. What I felt was something more complicated. A mix of the thing you feel when you are finally seen and the thing you feel when you realize being seen required a magazine article and a billionaire's endorsement. a mix of gratitude and grief. The particular sadness of understanding that the approval you spent your whole life needing was available all along. It just required you to be successful enough for it to be convenient. I said, "Thank you, Mom," and I meant it. And I also understood in that moment that I no longer needed it the way I once did. That somewhere between the kitchen sink and the sold-out collection and the midnight hours at the workbench, I had stopped organizing my life around the answer to her question of whether I was enough. I had decided I was, without her confirmation, without 14 people at a dinner table, without anyone's permission at all. Priya married Rohan the following spring. It was a beautiful wedding, and I was her maid of honor, and I stood beside her at the altar with genuine love in my heart because she had never been my enemy. She had only ever been the one my parents chose to hold up. That was done to both of us, in different ways, made her the pressure of impossible expectation, and made me the shadow of insufficient comparison. We talked about that, she and I, the night before her wedding, sitting on the floor of her hotel room in our pajamas sharing a bottle of champagne. She said, "I always knew you were the brave one. I was just the one they understood." I held on to that sentence for a long time afterward. Caleb Moore and I are still in a professional partnership. I will not tell you more than that because some things belong to me alone, but I will tell you that the man who noticed the oxidation on the copper at a dinner table where everyone else was looking at the $40 chicken has turned out to be, in every context I have encountered him, exactly what he appeared to be that first evening: someone who pays attention. I have 16 employees now. A studio in Raleigh that is 4 times the size of the apartment I started in. A permanent collection in 22 stores. A waiting list for custom pieces that is 4 months long. And a small framed index card on the wall of my studio, above the workbench, on which I have written the question Caleb asked me in my parents' kitchen that changed the direction of everything. The oxidation on the copper. Did you control that or let it happen naturally? I look at it every morning. Because that question, in its way, was not really about copper. It was about whether I had decided to be the author of my own surface or simply the object of someone else's weather. And the answer I gave him then is the answer I give myself every day now. I control it, applied in stages, sealed when it is ready. Here is what I want to say to you before I let you go tonight. If you are sitting somewhere right now being compared to a sibling or a cousin or a colleague, being told in the smooth, quiet, undramatic way that is somehow worse than shouting that you are the wrong version of what you were supposed to be, I want you to hear me. The people who dismiss you before you have finished building are not seeing something true about you. They are seeing something true about their own limited imagination of what success is allowed to look like. Your work, your craft, your particular and specific way of seeing the world, the thing you make at midnight in a small apartment with second-hand tools, is not nothing. It has never been nothing. It has always been waiting for the right person to stand close enough to actually look at it. Be ready for that person. Keep working. Control what you can control, let the rest develop naturally, and seal it when it is ready. The room where they dismiss you might be the exact room where the rest of your life begins. It was for me. Please subscribe to this channel right now if you have not already. Hit that bell notification so you never miss one of these stories. Share this video with someone in your life who is being told they are not enough, because one share might be the thing that reminds them to keep going on a night they were about to stop. And leave your name and your city in the comments below. I read every single one. Tell me where you are watching from tonight. Tell me what this story stirred up in you. This community is real, and showing up here matters more than you know. The next story is coming soon, and I promise you, it is going to stop you in your tracks. A woman who was fired on a Monday had a decision to make by Friday. What she chose changed not just her life, but the lives of 12 people who had no idea she was watching out for them. You are going to want to be here for that one. Subscribe, share, and tell me your name and your city. I will see you next time. End of story. My parents called me a failure at my sister's engagement. Then the billionaire guest asked for me. I want to go back to something I skipped past too quickly, because it deserves its full weight. The 4 months between Caleb's kitchen conversation and the collection launch were not a montage. They were not triumphant. They were, in fact, some of the hardest months I had experienced since the early days of the business, because hope, the specific, fragile, newly reactivated kind, is infinitely more terrifying than the numb resignation I had been living in before it arrived. When you have made your peace with small, hope feels like exposure. Like standing in an open field during a lightning storm, arms out. I woke up at 3 in the morning regularly during those 4 months. Not to work. I was working enough, plenty, 7 days a week. I woke up at 3 in the morning to lie in the dark of my studio apartment and conduct the quiet internal trial that I suspect most people who have been told for long enough that they are not enough are familiar with. The prosecution always presented the same evidence. Your mother's voice, your father's silence, the Easter dinner when the man you loved agreed with her, the $40 chicken, the smile you practiced at 9 years old. The defense had only one argument, and it was not eloquent. It was simply, keep going, show up to the workbench, make the next piece, send the next email. Show up. I showed up. There was a specific night in month 3 when I almost called Sasha and told her I needed more time. Not because the work wasn't ready, it was close to ready. Because I was suddenly, overwhelmingly certain that when the pieces went into those display cases in those 4 cities, they would sit there. That nobody would come. That the sold-out fantasies I had started, against my better judgment, to permit myself to imagine would be replaced by the specific humiliation of 42 handmade pieces gathering dust in 4 cities, while Sasha politely told me that perhaps the audience just wasn't there. I did not call Sasha. I made a cup of tea. I sat at the workbench. I picked up the piece I was working on, the 12th piece, the anchor of the collection, a large cuff in oxidized copper and river pearl that I had been saving for last because I was afraid I wouldn't be good enough to finish it the way I saw it in my head. I worked on it for 3 hours. At 2 in the morning, I set it down and looked at it under my work lamp, and it was exactly what I had seen in my head. I went to bed. I slept until 6. I got up and started the final detailing. That cuff was the first piece to sell on launch day. It sold in 4 minutes. A woman in Chicago, whose name I learned later because she emailed me personally, bought it as an anniversary gift for herself on the morning of her 25th wedding anniversary. She said in her email that she had been looking for something that looked like it had a story and had been through something and come out stronger. She said she thought that was what marriage was supposed to look like. She said she wore it every day. I keep that email too, right next to the index card about the copper. I want to talk about my father for a moment because I have mostly talked about my mother, and that is only half the picture. My father is a quiet man. Quiet in the way that some men are quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they have decided, at some point in their lives, that the most efficient position to occupy is simply the one that creates the least friction. He agreed with my mother not because he believed everything she said, but because disagreement required energy he had long ago stopped spending. He was not a mean man. He was an absent one, which is its own kind of damage, the damage of erasure rather than confrontation. The feeling of speaking into a room where someone is present but not listening. He was the one who told me, when I was 16 and had stayed up all night finishing a wire wrap piece for a school art show, that maybe I should focus more on math. Not because he thought I was bad at art, because he thought math was safer, because he thought safety was love. A lot of fathers do. It is not the same thing. After the magazine article, after my mother's phone call, after the "We're proud of you, Maya" that arrived 8 months too late and 20 years too late and still somehow meant something, my father sent me a text message. Just my father, separately, not my mother. It said, "I read the article. Your grandmother made jewelry. Did you know that? I never told you. I should have." That was the whole message. 9 sentences. I read it 6 times. I did not know my grandmother had made jewelry. She died before I was old enough to remember her clearly, and my father almost never talked about her. I sat with that text message for a long time, thinking about inheritance, not the financial kind, the other kind. The kind that skips generations, that travels through blood and hands, and the particular way a person looks at a material and knows, without being taught, what it wants to become. My grandmother made jewelry. My father never told me. I found it anyway. I called him back that evening. We talked for 40 minutes, which was 39 minutes longer than our typical phone conversations. He told me about his mother, a woman named Clara who had made beaded bracelets and sold them at church sales in rural Georgia, who had hands that were always working, who had died young and left behind a box of unfinished pieces that my father had kept in his closet for 40 years and never opened because opening it felt like too much. He said, "I should have shown you that box a long time ago." I said, "You can show me now." He drove to Raleigh the following Saturday with the box. I will not describe what was in that box in detail because some things are too private for a story, even a story this personal. I will tell you that it held 12 unfinished pieces and a small handwritten notebook with material notes in my grandmother Clara's handwriting, notes about where she sourced her beads, notes about which metal wires held a shape and which ones didn't, small pencil sketches of designs she never got to make. I will tell you that I sat on my studio floor with that box in my lap and my father beside me, and I cried in a way that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with recognition. Of seeing where the thing that had been dismissed as a hobby, a project, a failure to launch into real adulthood, where it had actually come from. 60 years back, 2 generations. Clara's hands and my hands, and the same conversation with the same materials about the same question. What does this want to become? I finished one of her unfinished pieces that winter. It took me 3 weeks. I did not add my own materials or my own style. I worked only with what was in the box, with her beads and her wire and the sketch she had left in the notebook. When it was done, I put it in a small case and gave it to my father for Christmas. He cried. My father, who had not disagreed with my mother at any dinner table in 20 years, held that piece in his hands and cried without any apparent concern for who was watching. My mother, sitting beside him on Christmas morning, was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "It's beautiful." She was not talking about the bracelet, or she was not only talking about the bracelet. I knew that. She knew I knew. We did not say anything else about it. We had leftover pie for lunch, and my mother asked me about the new collection, and she asked actual questions, interested questions, not the kind designed to establish distance between what I was doing and what she considered real. She asked how I chose my stones. She asked what liver of sulfur was. She asked if it was dangerous. I explained it to her at the kitchen table while my father held the bracelet, and outside the window the Christmas afternoon turned blue and cold. It was not the arrival of a perfect relationship. It was not the sudden healing of 20 years of comparison and quiet erasure. It was something more honest than that, the small, real beginning of a new kind of conversation between people who had been in the same family for 32 years and had not always been in the same story. That is not nothing. That is, in its way, everything that a family can offer once it has gotten past the parts it did wrong. I think about Caleb Moore's question often. The oxidation on the copper, did you control that or let it happen naturally? I think about it as a metaphor for the 20 years before the engagement dinner and the years that came after it. For the longest time, I let it happen. I let my mother's voice and my father's silence and every Easter dinner and every comparison and every clearance rack and every practiced smile build up on my surface like weather. I let it because I didn't know you could do otherwise. Because no one had ever leaned in close enough to ask whether the patina was mine or someone else's. The engagement dinner gave me the question. The 4 months of midnight workbench hours gave me the answer. And every morning since, when I look at the index card above my bench and read those 15 words, I remember that the surface I present to the world is mine to decide. Applied in stages, sealed when ready. The color it becomes when it meets the things that try to corrode it, that is not damage, that is character. That is the proof that you were here, that something real happened to you, and that you came through it as something more interesting than what you were before it arrived. My grandmother Clara knew that. She just never got enough time to show people. I have more time than she did. I intend to use it. One last thing, and then I will let you go. Priya called me last week. She is pregnant 8 weeks, still early, not telling everyone yet, but she told me. She said she wanted me to know first, before our parents, before Rohan's family, before anyone. She said, "You're the person I wanted to tell first. I don't know why. I just knew it was you." I think I know why. I think she needed to tell someone who understood what it meant to carry something new and fragile and full of possibility in a family that had very specific ideas about what things were supposed to look like. Someone who would not immediately respond with expectations or comparisons or a price per pound evaluation of whether this was the right kind of news. Someone who would just hold it with her for a moment and say, "This is wonderful. This is enough. You are enough. I said all of those things. I meant every one. And then I went to my workbench. I started sketching a piece. A small one. The kind that can be worn close to the body for a long time. Something that would last. For Clara's great-grandchild. Who is already, before they are even fully formed, already entirely enough. That is the story. All of it, or as much of it as belongs in a room like this one. Thank you for sitting with me through every word of it tonight. If it moved you, if it made you feel something you needed to feel or remember something you had started to forget, please subscribe to this channel and share this video. Send it to someone who is being told, in whatever quiet or loud or careful way, that they are not the right version of what they were supposed to be. You never know which story is the one that changes the direction of someone's night. Leave your name and your city in the comments below. I am waiting for you there. And the next story, I promise you it is already worth the wait. I will see you soon.